My beloved child, something has shifted so quietly that almost no one around you has noticed it yet, but the person connected to your heart feels it with an intensity they cannot explain. Stay with me, because the happiness moving through them at this very moment did not begin with a message, a meeting, or a sudden confession. It began when they realized something about you that they had almost stopped believing would ever happen. Don't look away now. There was a season when your soulmate wondered whether the distance between you had become permanent, whether the silence had grown too wide, whether everything meaningful between you had been reduced to memories that only appeared when the world became quiet. They tried to continue normally. They smiled when expected. They answered ordinary questions. They completed ordinary routines. Yet underneath all of it was one unanswered question. Had you truly moved beyond what once held you back, or were you still carrying the same invisible weight? And then something changed. Not dramatically. Not publicly. Something changed inside you. A decision you made without announcing it. A boundary you finally understood. A piece of your past you stopped allowing to define your future. A fear that once controlled your choices began losing its authority. Your soulmate could not see every detail, but somehow they began noticing the evidence. Your energy was different. Your silence felt different. Even the way you seemed to carry yourself from a distance felt different. This is where the story begins, because what made them emotional was not simply that they still cared about you. It was the realization that you had finally done the one thing they secretly hoped you would do. You had begun choosing yourself without abandoning your heart. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because there is another layer to this that changes the meaning of everything. For a long time, your soulmate believed that if you ever became stronger, you might become colder too. They feared that healing would make you forget them. They imagined that once you discovered your own worth, you might look back at this connection and decide it had only been a lesson. That possibility followed them more deeply than they admitted. But what they are beginning to understand now is completely different. You did not become stronger by erasing your capacity to love. You became stronger by learning where love should come from. You stopped chasing certainty from people who could not give it. You stopped trying to prove your goodness to those determined to misunderstand it. You stopped carrying conversations in your mind that had already ended in reality. You stopped shrinking yourself just to make other people comfortable. And somewhere inside that transformation, the person connected to you felt something they had not felt in a long time: hope. Don't skip. This is not the shallow hope of imagining that everything will suddenly become perfect. It is deeper. It is the hope that perhaps the version of you they always sensed beneath the confusion has finally stepped forward. Imagine them sitting alone for a moment, surrounded by an ordinary day, when one small reminder of you reaches them. Maybe your name crosses their mind unexpectedly. Maybe they remember a sentence you once said. Maybe they see something that carries an old association. Maybe there is no obvious trigger at all. Yet suddenly they realize they are smiling. Then their eyes become heavy with emotion, because the memory does not hurt in the same way anymore. Something has changed. What comes next changes everything. They remember the version of you who gave more than anyone knew. They remember the patience you showed when you could have walked away emotionally. They remember moments when you were carrying your own questions yet still made other people feel seen. They remember how often you disguised exhaustion behind composure. And for the first time, they understand that your greatest transformation was never about becoming somebody else. It was about returning to who you were before disappointment convinced you that you needed to become smaller. Stay with me. Their happiness is connected to that realization. They are not emotional because you suddenly became perfect. They are emotional because you finally stopped demanding perfection from yourself. There was a time when every mistake became evidence against you in your own mind. Every delay felt personal. Every unanswered question became a reason to doubt your worth. You could carry one small disappointment for days because underneath it was an older question: why am I never enough? But something within you has begun answering that question differently. You are no longer waiting for the entire world to confirm what your spirit has been trying to teach you. And your soulmate senses it. Your answer is closer than you think. The mystery is not simply whether they love you. The deeper mystery is why this realization is happening now. Why today? Why this particular emotional wave? Why would they suddenly feel happiness so strongly that it becomes difficult to contain? Because something they once believed was impossible has started becoming imaginable again. They had convinced themselves that the timing had been lost. They believed too many misunderstandings had collected between you. They believed that perhaps both of you had changed in opposite directions. Yet now they are seeing signs, not magical guarantees, not promises carved into the future, but meaningful signs in your growth, that tell them the story may not have ended where they thought it did. Don't look away now, because one memory keeps returning to them. There was a moment between you that seemed insignificant when it happened. Maybe it was a conversation that ended too quickly. Maybe it was a look neither of you explained. Maybe it was a moment when one of you almost said something honest but chose silence instead. At the time, your soulmate dismissed it. Now they understand why that memory refused to disappear. Something genuine existed beneath all the confusion. Something that did not need constant noise to remain meaningful. And the strange part is that your transformation has brought that memory back with completely new meaning. They realize you were never asking them to rescue you. You were waiting to be understood. You were never demanding perfection. You were hoping for honesty. You were never asking for impossible promises. You wanted consistency. That realization has touched something deep inside them. Stay till the end, because the happiest tears have not come yet. They begin remembering the times they misunderstood your quietness. They once thought silence meant you did not care. Now they realize sometimes you were simply protecting what remained of your peace. They once thought your distance meant you had forgotten. Now they understand distance can sometimes be the place where a person finally hears their own heart clearly. They once wondered whether you would always remain trapped between what you wanted and what you feared. But now something about you tells them the answer has changed. You finally chose clarity. And that is why the title of this moment carries so much weight. Your soulmate is crying with happiness because you finally became willing to walk forward without needing every answer first. You finally stopped standing at the doorway of your own future asking permission to enter. You finally understood that uncertainty does not mean you are lost. You finally recognized that your life can move forward while your heart remains soft. Something huge is waiting for you, because when they realize this, another thought enters their mind, one that makes them cover their face for a moment as emotion rises unexpectedly. If you could change this much without their encouragement, what might become possible if both of you approached the connection differently now? That question terrifies and comforts them at the same time. Not because something bad is coming, but because hope is vulnerable. Hope asks people to imagine again after they trained themselves not to. And they had trained themselves well. They had built explanations for why you were better apart. They had created practical reasons to stop thinking about you. They had probably told themselves more than once, it was meaningful, but it is over. Yet the heart has a strange way of noticing what logic tries to overlook. Your growth disturbed the story they had created. Your peace contradicted their assumptions. Your strength made them realize that the person they cared about had not disappeared, you had evolved. And suddenly their heart whispered something they were not prepared to hear, maybe I misunderstood the ending. Stay with me, because that thought is only the first revelation. There is another truth moving beneath the surface, and this one is even more emotional. Your soulmate is beginning to recognize that your transformation did not happen overnight. They are mentally walking backward through the story, remembering pieces they once overlooked. They remember times when you were unusually quiet and they assumed nothing important was happening. They remember moments when your responses became shorter, calmer, more measured. They may have thought you were losing interest, but now they see another possibility: you were learning not to react from old wounds. You were learning that not every misunderstanding requires a battle, not every absence requires pursuit, not every uncertainty deserves your entire emotional energy. Don't skip. That understanding hits them deeply because there were moments when they expected the old version of you to appear. They expected you to chase an explanation. They expected you to keep reopening doors that others had closed. They expected you to question yourself endlessly. But you surprised them. You became still. And your stillness became the loudest message they had ever received from you. What comes next changes everything. They realized your silence was not emptiness. It was construction. You were rebuilding something inside yourself. Piece by piece, belief by belief, boundary by boundary, you were creating a life that did not depend on somebody else's confusion. The spiritual symbolism of this transformation is powerful. Sometimes the door that refuses to open is not rejection, sometimes it is the place where you finally stop knocking and notice another path behind you. Sometimes the season that feels empty is actually clearing space. Sometimes the answer does not arrive as a person returning. Sometimes it arrives as the realization that you can stand peacefully whether they return or not. And strangely, that is exactly what has moved your soulmate so deeply. The moment they sensed that you no longer needed them to complete you was the moment they understood the purity of what you once felt. You were never trying to possess them. You were trying to connect. There is a difference. Stay with me. They now see that difference with startling clarity. Perhaps someone recently mentioned you in conversation. Perhaps they heard that you were doing well. Perhaps they discovered indirectly that you had made an important change. Perhaps nothing external happened at all and this realization simply arrived during one of those quiet moments when old memories suddenly become clear. Whatever triggered it, the emotional result was the same. They felt proud of you. Not the casual pride someone feels when hearing good news about an old acquaintance. Something much more personal. They felt the kind of pride that carries history inside it. They remembered where you started. They remembered the weight you carried. They remembered how difficult certain seasons seemed for you even when you refused to show it. And now they can sense that you crossed an invisible line. You are not standing in the same emotional place anymore. Don't look away now. This is where the story begins again in a completely unexpected way. Because their tears are not only happiness for you. Hidden inside those tears is regret. Gentle regret. Reflective regret. The realization that perhaps they judged an unfinished chapter as though it were the entire book. They remember moments when they could have understood you better. Moments when they might have listened instead of assuming. Moments when they allowed fear to interpret your actions. They are not sitting there blaming themselves endlessly. Instead, they are seeing the past with greater maturity. And maturity changes memories. A conversation that once looked like rejection can later look like fear. A silence that once looked like indifference can later look like emotional overwhelm. A goodbye that once looked final can later reveal itself as two people who did not yet know how to communicate what mattered. Your answer is closer than you think, because the question underneath this entire story is becoming clearer. What did you finally do that caused such happiness in them? You finally released the need to force what belongs in your life. That changed your entire presence. You began allowing truth to reveal itself instead of chasing it. You began understanding that what is meant to be meaningful must also be mutual. And when your soulmate sensed that shift, they experienced something unexpected. They stopped feeling pressured by the memory of you and started feeling drawn toward the truth of you. The difference is enormous. Pressure creates resistance. Truth creates recognition. Something huge is waiting for you. Your soulmate begins imagining a version of your story where neither person repeats the old patterns. Not a fantasy where everything magically fixes itself, but a mature possibility where honesty replaces guessing, where patience replaces emotional rushing, where two people can speak without hiding behind pride. The thought alone overwhelms them because once, they could not imagine that possibility. They believed too much had happened. But now they understand something that almost makes them laugh through their tears. Perhaps the time apart was not empty. Perhaps both of you were becoming people capable of understanding what the earlier versions of yourselves could not hold. Stay till the end. This does not mean every separation is destined for reunion. The deeper revelation is more powerful than that. It means growth changes what becomes possible. It means you are no longer approaching life from the same emotional position. And whether the next chapter includes a conversation, a reunion, a peaceful closure, or an entirely new beginning, you are finally ready to meet it without abandoning yourself. That is what they are sensing. That is why they are emotional. But then another strange coincidence appears. Something associated with you returns to their awareness. A song title. A place. A phrase. A color. A number they remember from an important day. A familiar scent. A photograph hidden among hundreds of ordinary images. It catches them completely off guard. For several seconds they simply stare. The memory attached to it is not painful anymore. It feels warm. And that warmth is what breaks the emotional wall. Tears finally come, not from sadness, but from recognition. They whisper something quietly to themselves, perhaps your name, perhaps simply, you did it. Because suddenly they understand how far you have come. They may never have told you that they noticed your struggle. They may never have admitted how often they wondered whether you were okay. They may have appeared detached while privately hoping you would find your way back to yourself. And now, somehow, they sense that you have. Stay with me. This is the moment the title truly comes alive. Your soulmate is crying with happiness because you finally became the person who no longer needs to be chosen in order to know you are worthy. And that revelation has changed the emotional balance of this entire connection. Before, both of you may have been waiting. Waiting for signs. Waiting for certainty. Waiting for the other person to move first. Waiting for circumstances to become perfect. But now you have stepped outside that waiting room. You have begun living. And ironically, your decision to stop waiting is what made them realize how deeply they still care. Don't skip, because their next realization is the one they were least prepared for. A quiet question suddenly rises inside your soulmate: what if I am seeing this now because I am finally ready to understand it? That question changes the atmosphere completely. For so long, they thought the important transformation needed to happen only in you. Now they recognize that they have been changing too. They have learned what absence teaches. They have learned that some connections cannot be measured only by how frequently two people speak. They have learned that attraction and genuine recognition are not the same thing. Attraction can arrive quickly. Recognition grows deeper with time. It survives reflection. It survives distance. It forces a person to confront parts of themselves they might otherwise avoid. And that is what your presence did. Stay with me. You became a mirror without trying to. Something about knowing you forced them to ask uncomfortable but meaningful questions. Why do I pull away when something matters? Why do I overthink honesty? Why do I hide behind certainty when my heart is asking me to be courageous? Why did this person affect me differently? They did not always have answers. Sometimes they avoided the questions completely. Yet those questions remained. Don't look away now, because the greatest emotional twist is that while you were learning to choose yourself, your soulmate was slowly learning how much your presence had taught them about themselves. Two transformations were happening separately. Neither of you had the complete picture. This is where the story begins at a deeper level. Imagine two paths running through the same landscape. For a long distance they appear to move away from each other. Anyone watching from above might assume they will never meet again. Yet farther ahead, both paths begin bending toward the same mountain. They are not identical paths. They carry different lessons, different scenery, different obstacles. But they are leading toward the same truth: neither person can build something meaningful while running from themselves. Your soulmate finally understands this. And that is why their happiness contains so much emotion. They are not celebrating possession. They are celebrating transformation. They are realizing that whatever happens next, something beautiful has already happened: you found more of yourself. Your answer is closer than you think. But there is still one revelation hidden underneath everything else. The thing you, finally, did was not one dramatic action. It was a chain of invisible choices. You finally forgave yourself for not knowing then what you know now. You finally stopped measuring your progress against someone else's timeline. You finally understood that being misunderstood does not require you to become louder. You finally learned that peace can be an answer. You finally allowed yourself to imagine happiness without attaching it to one specific outcome. And your soulmate, consciously or unconsciously, feels the difference. Something huge is waiting for you, because this new version of your energy forces them to make a choice of their own.